It started with a rattling door and a voice echoing up from the ground. "Hello. Somebody help. I am stuck." To anyone walking by, it might have sounded like an emergency, like someone had taken a wrong turn and ended up in trouble. But it wasn't what you think, because the woman yelling from inside my root cellar wasn't a lost hiker or a panicked guest. It was Karen, my nosy HOA neighbor, who had crossed onto my private land, picked the lock on my cellar door, and crept inside to snoop around where she had no business being. And when I caught her red-handed, I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just closed the door, turned the bolt, and called the sheriff. This panicked yelling may sound like someone in distress, but it's not what you think. Because when Karen snuck into my root cellar, I locked her in and waited for the sheriff to show up. You don't move out to the edge of town for the noise. You move out here for the stillness, for early mornings when the fog hugs the ground like a blanket, for dogs that roam free, and for a life that doesn't need to be explained to anyone. That's exactly why I bought my place a decade ago. A modest homestead on 5 acres of land, just far enough from the city to breathe, but close enough to pick up feed or run errands without packing a lunch. It wasn't a luxury estate, and I never wanted it to be. Just a sturdy 2-bedroom ranch house, a detached garage, a garden that kept my pantry full year-round. And my favorite feature of all, a proper root cellar, dug out into the hill behind the house, reinforced with stone walls, and sealed with an old steel door that used to be part of a bomb shelter. Most folks don't appreciate how useful a root cellar can be anymore. But out here, it was everything. Cool year-round, dry as a bone, and built like a vault. I used it for food storage, mostly potatoes, onions, canned goods, dried herbs from the garden. It also held some old family heirlooms, emergency supplies, and occasionally, overflow tools that didn't fit in the garage. I'd replaced the old locking handle with a sturdy deadbolt and added a motion trigger camera above the door just in case a curious critter got too bold. It wasn't a place for guests. It wasn't on a tour. It was part of the working system that kept my home running independently. And it sat, without issue, for over 9 years. Until Karen showed up. Now, I should be clear, Karen wasn't part of my neighborhood. Technically, she wasn't even supposed to be nearby. Her house sat inside a new development that had sprung up just across the back end of my property, a cul-de-sac suburb of vinyl-sided lookalikes called Crescent Pines. The developer had cut a few shortcuts through old farmland to make the project fit. And, wouldn't you know it, the last row of homes backed right up to the far edge of my fence line. At first, I didn't think much of it. Subdivisions come and go. As long as they didn't trespass or try to stretch their HOA rules onto my soil, we'd be fine. But Karen wasn't the type to mind her own business. She introduced herself within a week of moving in, walked all the way down the easement trail with a clipboard and a plastic smile, and said, "Hi, just wanted to let you know the HOA is recommending natural fencing along our share boundary. You might want to trim your hedgerow, so it looks more uniform." I blinked. "You're suggesting I trim my hedge to match your side?" She laughed like I'd missed the point. "Just so it doesn't feel so wild back here. Some of the neighbors are sensitive to unmaintained areas." "Ma'am," I said, "that hedgerow's older than your subdivision." She didn't like that. From that point forward, the visits became more pointed. Sometimes I'd see her walking along the edge of my fence with a phone out, snapping pictures like she was surveying the perimeter. Other times, she'd pause near the garden and say things like, "You should really cover your compost." We've had raccoon sightings, and I'd hate for anyone to get blamed. Karen didn't knock. She announced. Didn't ask. She advised. Always polite. Always pushy. And always with that little HOA lanyard dangling from her neck like a badge of honor. Still, I let it slide. 1 or 2 awkward encounters didn't make a war. I dealt with worse. Then about 6 months ago, I caught her standing just a few feet from the cellar door. She was bent over slightly, squinting at the hinges, holding a notepad. I opened the screen door behind her and said, "Can I help you?" She startled, then laughed, that same brittle chuckle, and said, "Oh, I was just admiring the craftsmanship. That's an old structure, right? Do you store things down there?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I do. And it's private." She took a step back, hands raised like I'd overreacted. "Of course. I was just curious. You know, in a survival situation, a place like that could be really valuable." Some of us in the HOA have been talking about preparedness. That was the first time I got that gut feeling, the one that crawls under your ribs and whispers something's not right here. I told her flatly, the cellar's on my deed, behind a locked door under surveillance. There's nothing down there anyone else needs to see. Karen smiled too wide. Of course. Just admiring. Lovely setup. She walked off. I made a mental note to check the camera footage. After that, I noticed the door handle was getting scuffed, like someone had been testing it. A small stone that usually sat at the base was moved once. Another time, the motion sensor light clicked on at 2 a.m., but when I reviewed the tape, the feed had glitched out for a moment, like someone had tampered with the camera, then backed off. I adjusted the angle, installed a backup recorder, and I waited, because I knew Karen wasn't done. She wasn't just curious, she was obsessed. I caught her at the edge of my fence again, weeks later, peering through the trees toward the hill where the cellar sat. When I walked out, she waved like it was a friendly coincidence and shouted, "Just walking off lunch." But she was always watching, always looking, and I could feel it, something was building. I just didn't know how far she was willing to go. Until the morning, I stepped out with my coffee and noticed the cellar door wide open. If you spend enough time living quietly, you develop a sixth sense for disturbance. Not the loud kind, not shouting or explosions. I'm talking about the subtle shifts, the out-of-place twig, the lingering gaze, the pause at the gate a second too long. Nature notices before people do. My dog, Boone, had already picked up on it. He'd started growling under his breath when he spotted Karen out near the eastern edge of the property. Tail low, eyes locked. That kind of distrust can't be taught. It has to be earned. And Karen was working hard to earn it. She'd become bolder in recent weeks, stopping by more often, always with a question that felt just a little off. One morning, as I was tending to the raised garden beds, she leaned over the split-rail fence and said, "Isn't it fascinating, the way properties hide things underground?" I blinked. Meaning, oh, just in general. Roots, cellars, wells, tunnels. Sometimes people forget what's buried right beneath their own land. She gave me a knowing smile and sipped from her metal water bottle, like it was a secret handshake. I gave her nothing. My cellar's clearly marked. You've seen the sign. Karen tilted her head. Just curious. You know, in the HOA meetings, we've been discussing emergency shelters. That hill of yours seems like it would be ideal if things ever went sideways. There was again that obsession with my cellar. I offered the same answer I'd given before. It's private. Always has been. Always will be. She gave that brittle, too sweet laugh and walked away. But from that moment on, I started checking the camera logs daily. A week later, Boone barked just after midnight. I looked out the window and caught a flash of movement. Someone slipping between the trees near the edge of the hill. I grabbed the spotlight and flashlight and stepped outside, but by the time I made it around the slope, there was nothing. Just quiet. I checked the cellar door locked. No footprints in the mud, but the motion sensor had tripped, and one of the old stones I kept propped beside the door had been moved. It didn't take a detective to figure out who'd been sniffing around. Still, I didn't report it. Not yet. I wanted a full picture. So I repositioned the backup camera to cover a wider angle, updated the alert system to ping my phone live, and added a small trail camera camouflaged near the base of the slope. I wasn't paranoid. I was being precise. Because it wasn't a question of if Karen would cross the line. It was a question of when. 3 days later, I was inside the house prepping some preserves when the alert hit my phone. Motion detected. Cellar perimeter. I pulled up the live feed. There she was. Plain as day. Karen, crouched in front of the root cellar door in a windbreaker and ball cap, fumbling with something, a bent piece of metal like a small pry bar. She glanced around like a raccoon in headlights, and then, shockingly, the door swung open. I hadn't realized she'd somehow cracked the lock. She slipped inside. The camera caught the door slowly drifting shut behind her. I stared at the screen for a moment, stunned. Then I put on my boots, walked out the back, and headed for the hill. The door was still ajar when I got there, barely. I stepped to the threshold and called down. "Karen." There was a brief shuffle. Then her voice came echoing up from the stone steps, annoyed and casual like she was inspecting a home listing. "Oh, hi. I just wanted to look around. This place is incredible, really old-world charm. I kept my tone even. You broke into my root cellar. She laughed, but it was hollow. No, I thought you left it open. I was just concerned someone could get hurt. It was locked. I was making sure no one was squatting in there. It's private property. You're trespassing. I'm a neighbor, she snapped, her voice rising. We're supposed to look out for each other. I didn't respond. I just closed the door and locked it. The thud of the bolt sliding into place echoed like a thunderclap. Wait, what are you doing? She shouted from the other side. Calling a sheriff, I said. This is illegal. You can't do this. You're trapping me. No, I said calmly, pulling out my phone. I'm detaining a trespasser on my private property. You broke in. It's all on camera. You'll be fine down there. It's cool, ventilated, and stocked better than most grocery stores. You're going to regret this. I don't think I will. I turned and walked back up the slope. Boone was sitting halfway up the hill, tail wagging. He knew what was coming. I made the call. Deputy Rivers, who I'd known for years, picked up. Trespassing, he repeated. Seriously? Broke into my root cellar. She's locked inside. I've got footage. There was a pause. You're kidding. Nope. I'm on my way. It took about 20 minutes for the cruiser to pull up the drive. Karen was still yelling intermittently, sometimes banging on the door, other times trying to reason through the steel like I was going to let her gaslight her way out of this. I greeted Deputy Rivers with the footage queued up on my tablet. He watched it silently. Karen cracking the lock, slipping inside. No sign of distress. Clear as day, he said. You did right. We walked down together. I unlocked the door. Karen stormed out, hair frazzled, cheeks flushed. He locked me in there like some kind of animal. Rivers held up a hand. Mom, you broke in. This isn't a gray area. But he's hiding things. That whole place should be inspected. I was trying to protect the neighborhood. You're not law enforcement, Rivers said calmly. You're a trespasser. She was cited right there. Criminal trespass, tampering, and a warning for attempted unlawful entry. She tried to argue, but Rivers had already seen the footage. So had his partner. There was no ambiguity. I didn't press further. Didn't need to. The law was on my side. And for once, so was reality. Karen's fantasy of power, her imagined authority as HOA spy, self-appointed inspector, and neighborhood savior, had ended the moment the bolt slid shut on that steel door. You can tell a lot about a person by how they react when they realize they've lost control. Some shrink. Some cry. Karen? She screamed. The moment I swung the heavy cellar door shut and turned the bolt, it echoed like thunder through the trees. I didn't slam it, just shut it firm, the way you close the lid on something that shouldn't have been opened in the first place. From inside, her voice rose fast, frantic and shrill. Hey, what are you doing? I didn't answer. You can't lock me in here. This is illegal. I'll sue you. I'll have you arrested. I leaned slightly toward the door and said evenly, You broke in. You're trespassing. I'm detaining you on my property until law enforcement arrives. That made her absolutely explode. I'm a woman. I'm alone. This is kidnapping. I'm calling 911. You don't have service in there, I replied, calm as a pond. It's all stone and earth. I want to sit down and take a few deep breaths. Then I turned and walked away. Boone met me halfway up the hill, tongue out, tail swishing like this was a game he'd watched a dozen times before. I gave him a scratch behind the ear and pulled out my phone. Pressed the speed dial. Sheriff's office, this is dispatch. Yeah, this is protagonist's name. I've got a trespasser locked inside my root cellar. Caught her breaking in on camera. A pause. You locked someone inside? Yes, ma'am. She let herself in. I made sure she couldn't get out. She's unharmed, just angry. I'm requesting deputies to resolve it. What's your address again? I gave it. She didn't sound surprised, just confirmed my number and said a deputy would be en route within 20 minutes. Then I walked back to the porch. Boone flopped at my feet. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, and we waited. The yelling went on for about 10 minutes before Karen's voice started to crack. She alternated between rage and desperation. You're going to jail for this. I have rights. You're a danger to this neighborhood. I'll tell them you hurt me. They'll believe me. Each threat was weaker than the last. Each accusation more unhinged. I didn't respond to a single one. That cellar wasn't airtight. It had passive ventilation built into the rear wall. Nothing high-tech, just good old-fashioned airflow. She had light from the skylight vents. She had a flat bench to sit on. I'd even left some sealed jugs of water down there the week prior. She wasn't trapped. She was contained. And for once in her life, she wasn't in control. When the cruiser rolled up the drive, I met them at the gate. 2 deputies stepped out. One was Deputy Rivers, who I'd spoken to before. The other was younger, new face. Name tag said Colton. I handed Rivers my tablet with the surveillance footage already queued. Karen, clearly visible, prying at the lock, slipping inside like she owned the place. He watched silently. Let me guess, he muttered. She called this kidnapping. Something like that, I said. She's lucky you didn't press charges for attempted burglary. I'm not pushing harder than I need to. I just want the record clear. It will be. We walked to the cellar. Karen had gone quiet, though the moment she heard our footsteps, she perked back up. Officers, help me. He's unstable. Rivers knocked twice. Karen, it's Deputy Rivers. Step back from the door. You have to get me out of here. He locked me in here like an animal. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to me. She stepped in willingly, unlocked the door herself. Broke in, actually. Got it. He unlocked the door, slowly swung it open. Karen burst up the stairs, flushed and frantic, clutching her purse like a hostage. You have to arrest him. He tricked me. I was inspecting a safety hazard. Colton stepped in front of her gently. Mom, you're on private property. That structure is lawfully recorded. You were caught on camera entering without permission. I was checking. I thought there might be illegal activity. Rivers handed her a printed still frame. Her, mid-entry, face turned toward the camera. Karen's eyes darted between the image and Rivers' calm expression. I didn't realize. He cut her off. We've got your voice on the footage, too. You knew what you were doing. This wasn't a mistake. They didn't cuff her. Didn't need to. That would have given her a martyr complex. Exactly what she wanted. Instead, Rivers calmly issued the citation right there on the tailgate of his cruiser. Criminal trespass. Unlawful entry. Tampering with private property. She protested, weakly but still tried. You're going to let him get away with this? Rivers raised an eyebrow. You want to press charges for being locked inside a room you broke into? Karen said nothing. Then she turned, walked stiffly back toward her development. Red-faced, hair tangled, pride leaking out of her like a slow puncture in a beach ball. I stood with the deputies a moment longer. Colton finally spoke. She's a trip. She's a problem, Rivers corrected. Any chance she'll come back? I shook my head. Not after today. That door closing? That's the first time in her life anyone's held her accountable for something. Rivers gave a single laugh and clapped me on the shoulder. You handled it right. Call us if anything else happens. I will. Boone barked once as they left. Not loud, just enough to say, next time, we won't wait. It's funny how fast someone's voice can change when they're no longer in charge. Karen had always spoken like she had a clipboard in her hand. Pointed, certain, like she was narrating a rulebook only she had the right to enforce. But after the sheriff left that day, after she walked back up the trail from my cellar, red-faced, and clenching the citation in her palm like a losing lottery ticket, the whole neighborhood heard a different tone from her. A little less certainty, a little more squirm. That night, the Crescent Pines Community Board, her pride and joy, held an emergency meeting over Zoom. Normally, these were sleepy affairs. Discussions about mailbox paint, HOA dues, and whether the playground mulch needed replacing. But this one had energy, because everyone already knew. Half the neighborhood had seen the deputy car parked at the bottom of my hill. The other half had heard Karen's raised voice echoing through the trees. And just a few hours after that, someone, not me, had posted a clip from the sheriff's body cam footage. Just 10 seconds, just enough to show Karen stumbling up the root cellar steps and barking about how she was only inspecting for community safety, followed by Rivers' quiet, calm voice replying, "Ma'am, this is private land. That's criminal trespass." That was all it took. The next day, 3 different neighbors messaged me directly, people who had never so much as waved before. Hey, just wanted to say I'm sorry she did that. Total overstep. You handled it with class. I never liked how she talked about your place anyway. Karen's name had been on every Crescent Pines newsletter for 3 straight years. Now, she vanished from the header overnight. No message from the board president. No Karen's Corner. Just silence. And a note about an upcoming HOA leadership vote. But the fallout didn't stop with social embarrassment. A few days after the incident, I received a formal letter from the county office, signed by Sheriff Rivers himself. It read, "After review of the body cam footage, property surveillance footage, and your recorded call to dispatch, we affirm that your actions constituted legal detainment under state trespass statutes. No criminal wrongdoing on your part was identified. The individual in question was cited for criminal trespass and disorderly conduct. Should you wish to pursue further civil claims for attempted unlawful entry or property damage, you may do so through the county clerk." I folded the letter carefully and filed it with my deed, next to a printout of the footage timestamps. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted the truth documented permanently. Karen had crossed the line, and the law backed me up. No HOA rule, no title, no neighborly excuse could undo the fact that she had broken in, and I had handled it exactly right. That didn't sit well with her inner circle. The HOA board, now down a president, scrambled to contain the PR spill. They issued a vague email titled Clarification on Recent Incident, claiming that certain neighborhood misunderstandings had led to confusion around access boundaries. Confusion? There was no confusion. There was a camera, a lock, and a citation, all pointing one way. They claimed Karen had acted in good faith, that concerns had been raised about emergency preparedness structures, that she had mistakenly believed the cellar was accessible for inspection, and that, conveniently, no charges had been filed. That was true. I hadn't pressed any further than the initial citation. But the footage told a different story, and people knew it. That same day, a Crescent Pines resident posted this to the community forum. If you're going to blame confusion, maybe stop sending people onto private land with pry tools. I saw the video. She wasn't confused. She was caught. By the end of the week, the HOA had removed the clarification email from their site entirely. And Karen? She tried to pivot. I saw her once, standing at the edge of her property, waving at passing cars and telling one of the joggers, it was all a misunderstanding. I was just checking on potential flood risk zones. A few days later, a new rumor surfaced that I had booby-trapped my cellar to lure her in. Ridiculous. But that's what people like Karen do when they lose control. They throw as much noise into the air as they can, hoping something sticks. It didn't. In the weeks that followed, the narrative settled. Not her favor. Neighbors who used to mimic her tone started keeping their distance. A few of the board members who had supported her quietly resigned. The HOA held a new election, and a man named Derek, calm, respectful, neutral, was elected to serve as interim president. He dropped by my gate one morning, hat in hand. I don't speak for what she did, he said, but if it's worth anything, a lot of us respect how you handled it. You didn't go nuclear. You just stood your ground. I thanked him, told him I didn't need favors, just space. He smiled. You've got it. From there, the calm returned. Karen kept to herself. No more strolls by the fence line. No more comments about my compost bin. No more mentions of community safety initiatives. She still lived there, at least for now. But she no longer held the HOA leash. No longer popped into board meetings like a monarch giving orders. Her reign was over. And while she may never apologize, the neighborhood did it for her in quiet ways. A thank you pie from the older couple 3 doors down. A handwritten note from a teenager who said, thanks for not letting her get away with it. Even a Cellar security champion trophy made from with scraps and duct tape left anonymously on my porch. All of it small, simple, but real. The kind of validation that doesn't need a headline. Just truth. Karen didn't make an official announcement. No grand resignation. No farewell post in the Crescent Pines newsletter. She just disappeared from the letterhead. One day, her name was printed beneath the HOA logo. President, Karen, last name, and the next it was gone. Replaced by someone named Derek, who actually smiled with his eyes and didn't walk around with a whistle and a clipboard like he was running a military base. No one really asked what happened, because everyone already knew. The story had spread beyond our little border fence. Everyone had seen the footage. Everyone had heard the yelling, and more than a few had whispered she really went in there, like they were talking about someone who walked into a trap, not a legally marked lock structure. From that point on, everything changed. The fence line stayed quiet. No more surprise inspections. No more subtle threats about neighborhood compliance. People who once glanced at me sideways now nodded with respect. Some even waved. I wasn't a problem neighbor anymore. I was the guy who shut the cellar door when someone crossed the line. And somehow, that made people feel safer. Still, I didn't take any chances. The very next week, I reinforced the root cellar, upgraded the deadbolt, added a second trail cam with night vision, ran an underground cable for backup power to the motion lights, posted a second, clearer sign. Private property. Entry without permission is trespassing and will be prosecuted. Yes, this means you. And just for good measure, I placed a dummy camera directly over the door, blinking red like something out of a science fiction movie. Karen hadn't even touched the real camera when she broke in. But now, anyone coming near that door would think they were being filmed by the FBI and a weather satellite. 2 weeks later, I hosted my annual summer barbecue, something I'd skipped the last few years because of the drama. But this time, I printed little name tags, fired up the smoker, and invited neighbors old and new. Some brought pie. Others brought curiosity. Derek showed up with a six-pack and said, "Mind if I finally see the famous cellar?" I gave him the tour. Door locked open, lights on, and nothing special to see except rows of canned tomatoes, potatoes in baskets, and one carefully placed folding chair labeled Karen's seat. That got the biggest laugh of the night. Someone asked if I had T-shirts printed. I didn't, but I was thinking about it. By the end of the evening, people were talking, laughing, relaxing. No HOA business. No warnings. Just neighbors being neighbors. A little girl asked if the cellar was haunted. I winked and said, "Only by people who can't follow posted rules." And for the first time in a long while, I sat back in my own yard, full plate in my lap, Boone sprawled out beside me, and felt peace again. Earned peace. Not because I fought back with fire, but because I held the line with patience, proof, and a perfectly timed bolt sliding into place. Karen crossed the boundary. I just made sure she couldn't pretend she didn't. And in the process, the neighborhood learned something important. You don't have to yell to make a statement. Sometimes you just need to lock the door and let the truth echo through the stone that if someone thinks they can dig into your life without consequence, remind them, curiosity didn't just kill the cat. It got Karen locked in my root cellar until the sheriff came knocking. There's a line between concern and control, between neighborly interest and invasion. And Karen? She didn't just step over that line. She picked the lock, opened the door, and walked straight into a lesson she'll never forget. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get aggressive. I just let her actions speak for themselves and made sure the law heard them loud and clear. Because when someone decides your property, your peace, or your privacy is up for inspection, the best thing you could do isn't fight fire with fire. It's fight fiction with fact. A deed, a camera, a sheriff, and a steel door that shuts nice and tight. So if you've got a Karen sniffing around your fence line, remember, you don't need to shout. Just bolt the truth down, let them walk into it on their own, and keep the sheriff on speed dial. Because sometimes the best answer to HOA nonsense is a locked door and a calm cup of coffee. And maybe a chair labeled Karen's seat.